A young woman inherits a fortune from her father. Most people in her position, in her era, would have kept it, built a bigger house, lived comfortably and quietly. Instead, she spends every coin of it building a school. Not a small one. A school that's still open today, still teaching students, still handing out degrees. Over 1100 years later, here's the question that sounds almost too simple. What's the oldest university in the world? The oldest one that's still actually open, still operating right now, exactly as you're watching this? If you guessed Oxford, Bologna, or Cambridge, you're about to find out you're off by centuries. Let's set the scene first, because the answer to this question is honestly kind of embarrassing for how Western education history usually gets told. For most of us, the oldest university mental list starts in Europe. Bologna, founded in 1088. Oxford, teaching in some form by 1096. Names we hear constantly in movies, in rankings, in oldest institutions lists. Old, prestigious, foundational to how we think about higher education. Except none of them are the oldest. The actual answer is the University of Al-Qarawiyyin, founded in the city of Fez, Morocco, in the year 859. Not 1088, not 1096, 859. That's over 2 centuries before Bologna even existed, and it is still functioning today as a degree-granting university, which is exactly why Guinness World Records recognizes it as the oldest existing, continually operating educational institution in the world. Let that sit for a second, because there's a bigger detail here that makes this even more remarkable. It was founded by a woman. Her name was Fatima al-Fihri. She came from a wealthy merchant family that had relocated to Fez, and when her father passed away, she inherited a substantial fortune. She could have done what most wealthy heirs in the 9th century did with sudden money. Literally nothing dramatic. Instead, she made a decision that would outlive her by over 1,000 years. She used the entire inheritance to fund the construction of a mosque and attach to it a center of learning. That center of learning became Al-Qarawiyyin, and it wasn't a small local school. Over the following centuries, it grew into a genuine hub of scholarship, teaching subjects like Islamic law, grammar, mathematics, astronomy, and medicine, attracting scholars and students from across North Africa and beyond. Now here's the twist that makes this story even wilder. Some of the most influential thinkers in medieval intellectual history are connected to this institution. There's substantial historical evidence linking scholars associated with Al-Qarawiyyin to major developments in science and philosophy. The kind of intellectual cross-pollination that eventually helped shape thinking in Europe itself, centuries before European universities existed in their familiar form. Meaning some of the same intellectual currents that people credit to the European university system were arguably already flowing through a school in Morocco, founded by a woman hundreds of years earlier. So why does almost nobody learn this in school? Part of it is straightforward historical framing. Western educational history tends to get told starting from Bologna and Oxford, largely because those are the institutions that directly shape the university model most Western countries eventually adopted. Degrees, faculties, structured curricula in the form we recognize today. Al-Qarawiyyin operated differently for much of its history, more closely tied to religious scholarship in its early structure, and it existed inside a completely different documentation and record-keeping tradition than European institutions. But operating differently doesn't mean it wasn't a university in the functional sense. It taught structured subjects. It had recognized scholars. It granted what were effectively degrees of religious and legal authority to students who completed advanced study. And critically, it never stopped. It didn't get founded, flourish for a while, then collapse or convert into something else. It has been continuously operating in the same city for over 1,100 years. That continuity is the actual record-breaking part. Plenty of ancient learning centers existed before it. Think the Library of Alexandria or ancient centers of philosophy in Athens. But those didn't survive as functioning, degree-granting institutions into the present day. Al-Qarawiyyin did. It's not just old. It's old and still running, which is a completely different, much rarer thing. Here's where it gets even more interesting. In 1963, al-Qarawiyyin was formally integrated into Morocco's modern state university system, standardizing its structure to align with how universities function today, meaning it's not a historical curiosity you visit like a museum. Students are enrolled there right now, studying, earning modern degrees, in a building whose academic lineage traces back to a woman's inheritance from the year 859. So here's the unifying theory tying this whole story together. The version of history most of us absorb. Who invented what? Who built the first version of something is often shaped less by what actually happened first, and more by whose records got preserved, translated, and repeatedly retold in the language and institutions that ended up dominating global education discourse. Europe didn't invent the university. Europe built the specific institutional model that later spread globally and got written into most textbooks. Those are two very different claims, and history quietly blurred them together. And Fatima al-Fihri herself is almost never mentioned in the mainstream story of who built the first university, despite founding the institution that literally holds the world record for it. Which raises the question worth sitting with. What else got quietly left out of the first and oldest stories we take for granted? Because if the actual oldest still running university on Earth can get overlooked for this long, it's worth wondering what else in the history we think we know is sitting in the same blind spot, just waiting for someone to ask the obvious question instead of accepting the familiar answer. If this is the kind of thing that gets stuck in your head, a fact that quietly rewrites something you assumed was settled, that's exactly what this channel does every week. Subscribe if you want more of these, and drop a comment with the next everyone assumes X, but actually story you want dug up. I read every one, and a lot of them turn into the next video.